We're continuing to make an exploration into form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. Remembering that it's been mooted, that every character in every story is an aspect of our own being, our own psyche. Bearing this in mind, let's see what this rather long story evokes for us. It's a story a long time ago in the far-off city of Isfahan. And in that city there was a rich merchant and his wife who had had several children, all of whom had died for one reason or another, except for one surviving daughter, who they called Roxanne. Roxanne meaning clever. And Roxanne certainly lived up to her name, because she grew up to be quite precocious, very intelligent, and besides this, she grew into a very beautiful young woman. Now, as was the custom in that place at that time, as it still is today in some places, at the age of 15, her parents chose for her a young, rich merchant of that place to become her husband. And they were wed, and Roxanne was taken to the house of her husband, and in that household there was only her husband's widowed mother, her husband and herself. Now, very often her husband had to go off on trading excursions, and she was left with the widow. But as was the custom, it was the widow, the mother's duty to teach daughter-in-laws how to take care of the household. And this Roxanne did very well. So it came to the time, at a time when her husband was away on one of his buying missions, that the mother-in-law decided that she would go to the far-off place of Cairo to visit her relatives, leaving Roxanne in the house on her own. Now, Roxanne was quite happy in that situation. She would sit doing her needlework and while away the time. But one day, as she was sitting there, she heard a scratching sound and the creaking of a door. She thought this was very strange, and she was quite afraid. So she rose up and went to look, and there, inside her door at the back of the house, was a man. His feet were covered in felt, and he was carrying an empty sack, and it was immediately obvious to Roxanne that he was a thief and up to no good. Of course, the thief was greatly surprised to be confronted with Roxanne, unveiled and very beautiful. But Roxanne, being the clever being that she was, immediately reacted by greeting the robber. "Oh, uncle, I'm so glad to see you. I was so sorry when you were not able to attend our wedding. Come in and let me take care of you." Well, of course, the thief was somewhat undone by his greeting, but what could he do? He had to go along with it. And so he was escorted into the sitting room, where Roxanne sat him down and immediately went to the kitchen to bring sherbet to him, make him comfortable. And she kept up her banter with him. So the thief became more and more comfortable in this situation, and he thought he'd play along. So he sat back and began to enjoy these ministrations to him. And after Roxanne had given him sherbet and sweetmeats to eat and rubbed his feet, she brought along a Hubble Bubble pipe for him, which he gladly started to suck on. And of course, after eating and drinking and smoking the pipe, he became a little bit sleepy and nodded off, which gave Roxanne her opportunity to dash out to the neighbor's house, bring them back. They gave the thief a thorough beating and threw him out the door. Well, the thief was very, very angry. How dare a little whippersnipper like this outsmart him? So he vowed to take his revenge. So the mother-in-law came back to the house, and some time later there was a knock on their door. And when the mother-in-law opened the door, there was a stranger standing outside with 3 big chests. And the man said, "Oh, I'm a friend of your late husband's, and he was very kind to me when he was alive, and I have these 3 chests full of my treasures because I have to go away, and I wondered if you'd take care of them for me." Well, the mother-in-law was a very obliging woman, and she said, yes, bring the chests in. But Roxanne was suspicious of what was going on, and she noted immediately that 2 of the chests had padlocks on them and 1 did not. So the mother-in-law had the 3 chests brought into their own treasure room, where they kept all of their valuables, and the man left. Well, Roxanne went in, and she took a padlock herself and padlocked the 3rd chest. She recognized that something was afoot here. So when the mother-in-law had gone to sleep, Roxanne went down to the kitchen and boiled up a pot of oil. Then she brought back into the treasure room, and she poured oil into each of the chests, causing the men who were inside to scream with pain. So Roxanne, of course, had her confirmation that this was up to no good, but she dragged the men out of the chest, put them out the front door, went to bed and went to sleep. The next morning, when she got up and went outside, the 3 men were missing. They'd dragged their tortured bodies off back to the chief thief, who, of course, was absolutely incensed that his second plan was foiled, that this little minx had outwitted him again. And he vowed that he was going to take revenge. Well, it so happened that Roxanne's husband went off on one of his buying excursions, and a few days after he was gone, word came back that a band of robbers had beset his caravan, and her husband had been assassinated, killed. So Roxanne, still in her teens, found herself a widow. And as was the custom, she left her mother-in-law's house and went back to live with her own mother and father. Now, a young widow, even though she was beautiful and clever, was considered soiled. So even though there was thought that she would be married again, it wasn't such an easy task as when one was virginal. But she was happy in her mother and father's house, and they were happy to have her. But in the meantime, the thief was plotting his revenge. He was very rich. He was a very good thief, so he'd amassed quite a fortune and a mansion. So he approached an old crone, who happened also to be a matchmaker on the side. And he bargained with her to ensnare Roxanne. And the old crone, being a greedy old crone, had thought that Roxanne would be a prime person for her to get another suitor for. But the thief offered her so much money she couldn't refuse it. So she said, "Now this is going to take some time, you'll have to leave it with me." So the thief went off, and the old crone moved into the house next door to Roxanne's parents. And pretending to be a pious old woman, because Roxanne's mother happened to be a pious old woman, they became friends, very good friends and confidants, really. They were always at each other's house. The old crone coming over for a cup of sugar or a bottle of milk or something from time to time, so they could chit-chat and so forth. So she was well trusted. Roxanne's mother thought that she was a dear old soul. So it was in place. And there was an occasion when Roxanne's mother and father were going off to visit some relatives. And the old crone knew that this was her opportunity. So she warned the thief, and their plan was enacted. The old crone came over to Roxanne's house and said, "I have a message from your mother to say that your cousin is getting married where we are, and we want you to come and join the marriage. We've sent a carriage for you." But Roxanne scratched her head and thought this was rather strange. But there was the carriage outside the door. What could she do? So she got in the carriage with the old crone, because the old crone said, I know where to go. So the old crone took them off, and they went for rather a great distance. And Roxanne was becoming more and more suspicious of what was going on, but there she was, in the carriage. What could she do? And the carriage stopped outside a great house, but there was nobody there, no festivities, no servants. But the old woman assured her, no, come in. And so Roxanne was escorted into this magnificent mansion. There were treasures everywhere, into a room. And there the old crone left her, closing the door behind her. Roxanne immediately knew that something was up, because when she went to open the door, it was locked. She found herself entrapped. Well, by this time, the thief had come along with his knife at the ready. He was going to dispose of this minx. But in the meantime, Roxanne was looking around. What could she do? How could she escape? No windows, the door was locked, but when she looked up there was a skylight. And she quickly pulled over a table and a chair, climbed on the chair, on the table, and broke the skylight and was able to escape. Now, as it happened, the horse that had drawn the carriage was there. Roxanne got on the horse and rode quickly back to her house. When the thief went into the house, he was so furious, because not only had Roxanne escaped, but she'd taken a lot of his treasures with her. Stuffed her pockets with the gold ornaments and things that were around this very rich house. Well, the thief was beside himself with anger. He would get even no matter what. So Roxanne went back to her house, but she didn't mention any of this adventure to her mother and father when they came back. And the mother and father by this time were really making plans for her to get married again. It was proper. They'd been to a matchmaker. The matchmaker had bought several suitable potential husbands, but Roxanne had refused them all. Well, the thief got wind of this, and he had a plan. This time he was very rich, so he set himself up as a goldsmith. In fact, in a very short time, with his fancy dresses and his neatly trimmed beard, he became a quite well-liked gentleman around town. After all, he owned a goldsmith's shop. And in this position, of course, he was able to approach the matchmaker and offer himself as a husband for Roxanne. So when the parents heard of this, they were adamant. You've refused so many suitors. This man is eminently suitable for you, an illustrious member of the community, owns a goldsmith shop. He's rich. You cannot refuse him. You must marry him. What could Roxanne do? But as it happened, Roxanne was going to buy some jewelry to add to her dowry. And where should she go but to the goldsmith shop? But of course Roxanne was heavily veiled, as was the custom in that time. But as soon as she walked into the goldsmith shop, knowing that this was her suitor, she recognized the thief. It was him. It seemed that her fate was sealed. But Roxanne had a plan. So as the wedding preparations were being made, Roxanne got herself a goat skin, and she filled it with a delicious nectar, the color of blood. And as was the custom, it was always the bride who was escorted into the wedding chamber and left there when her husband would come and greet her. So Roxanne set it all up, the goat skin in the bed, wearing an identical wedding gown as the one that she was going to wear. She even made it up that the veiled being with the wig had a string attached to it that would nod its head. And so the the wedding took place, Roxanne and the thief, and she was escorted into the bedroom, into the chamber, where she hid herself behind a screen with the string. In came the thief, dressed in all his fancy wedding gear. He said, "At last, we're alone. I've got you for myself." Went the head. "You little minx, you think you've got away from me all of these years and outfoxed me all of these times?" So he became thought, but no, his plan was fixed. Took out his knife. He went over, stabbed, outpoured. He said, "Now I'm going to drink your blood just as a final gesture." He'd never tasted anything so delicious in all his life. He said, "What have I done? What have I done? I fell in love with you the moment I saw you, and now and even your blood tastes sweet. What have I done?" So he took the knife. He was about to stab himself in the chest when Roxanne came out from behind the screen. She said, "What? Do you want to make me a widow again?" She went over and embraced him. They fell into one another's arms and had a night of conjugal bliss, lived happily ever after, and had many sons. So the question that we might ask from this story is, what is the main character of this tale? And what does that character represent as an aspect of our own psyche, our own self? Remembering that all characters of all stories are representative of part of our being. What is the main character of this story? And what aspect would you say is a representation of ourselves? Is it Roxanne?